welcome back. My name is Curtis Perry. I'm a photographer, writer, musician on Cedar Algonquin territory, also known as Ottawa, Canada. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about ideas for composing your shots in event photography. So I recently had the opportunity to cover a Ottawa Chamberfest concert with renowned Canadian pianist Janina Fialkowska. And I just want to talk about what I was able to do with these shots, and I'll put them up on the screen as I go. And I'll talk about six tips that go beyond rule of thirds. So you've probably heard of rule of thirds. You just divvy up the screen, and the idea is that you're going to get sort of harmony in your composition, right? But there's so much more to that. When you're taking photos, there's depth that you want to consider, and I think that going beyond 2D, thinking about the 3D space is sort of the unifying factor between all these different tips. So the first one I would say is to cover the room. So what I mean by that is, as much as you can, move with your feet, not with the zoom lens, right? Go from one side of the space to the other, go to the back of the room, get as close as you can within reason. Know the space as much as you can. If you have the opportunity to shoot in the space multiple times, that's really helpful. And what I also mean by cover the room is consider angles that you may have not otherwise considered. Go low, go high, figure it out, get precise, kind of explore it a little bit, right? You're going to be able to get a good variety of shots. Second thing is layers. So what I mean by that is having a foreground, middle ground, background in your shots. You might use in this case, there's pillars, so you use that, capture some foreground. Or maybe you want to use like a banister in a railway. If there's a second floor balcony in the space that I shot in, so I used the banister there to kind of shoot through it and get some foreground blur. Or of course you might want to include some of the audience, and when you do that, you're going to get some interesting context, right? So that'll get you your foreground, maybe a bit of foreground blur. If you've got layers in your photo, it's just going to be a lot more interesting, generally speaking. If you can add, especially that foreground element, if you can put that in the mix, it really gives it more of a sense of intimacy, and it makes it a lot more interesting, generally speaking. The third one is frames within frames. And what I mean by that is, in the photo, you've got, of course, sort of a frame, that itself, right? But within that, a classic one, maybe not an event, would be like a mirror, right? Shooting somebody through a mirror. In this case, I chose the second floor banister, kind of shooting through that. And then in addition, I was able to use the piano as almost like a second framing device. And it helps sort of, frame your subject. It draws interest and attention. And with all these, what you want to do is you want to direct the eye a little bit. It should be pretty clear, what the subject is. What is this photo about? If you take a photo and somebody says, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at, well, it's the opposite of what you want. They should know exactly what they're looking at. What is the intent here, right? What's the story? The leading lines, again, it's about sort of directing attention, right? Think about literally different ways to use the space to have some lines that lead up to your subject, right? In the seating arrangement, there's sort of like a hall, a corridor there. And I was able to frame it or compose it in such a way that the lines went right up to the performer, right? For example. So if possible, using leading lines to direct attention to your subject is a great idea. Fifth, aspect ratios and crops. If you're shooting raw, then you're going to have all your photos with the entire sensor being used. So chances are it's going to be 3:2 ratio sensor, and that is the way, that's our standard. If you ask the average person, you think of a photo, they'll probably think of a photo in a 3:2 ratio. But try to break out of that box a little bit if it serves the purpose of the photo, right? So at least in one case here, I decided the square served the story of the photo better by completely centering the subject within that square with no distractions. And in another case, I'm kind of a sucker for the 6:5 to 24 ratio. So it's kind of like two photos stitched together, 2:3:2 photos, I guess, stitched together as a panorama. Made popular by the famous X-Pan camera, but it's a super wide aspect ratio, and it's super dramatic, and I'm kind of a sucker for it. So I'd like to throw one in there sort of for fun. And so in this case, I put all the attention on the piano and the pianist, of course, and just nothing else, just that moment, that slice in time, if you will. Don't be afraid to crop. If you gotta adjust a little bit, if there's like one sort of errant element on the side of the frame and you gotta take it out, and don't be afraid to break out of that 3:2 aspect ratio box if it serves the purposes of directing attention in the photo and making it more interesting, right? Motion, emotion, eye contact. I think this is kind of the most important thing, right? We talk about in photos light, composition, moment. Moment is so important, it's almost separate from composition. So why am I talking about it as a way of composing your shot? I just want to include it because it's just that important. It directs your attention. You can use layers and frames within frames and leading lines and a great crop and a really interesting angle, but if the subject isn't apparently doing something, apparently feeling something, thinking something, what's the point? It's critical to capture emotion, and sometimes that can be a really subtle thing. It's everything. I just wanted to include in sort of this overall discussion of composing your shots. Thank you very much for watching. Give it a thumb if you liked it, sub if you loved it. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I'll see you next time.